in just a moment. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Michael Morella, a managing editor at U.S. News and World Report. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. Earlier this month, U.S. News released the second edition of Best Senior Living, a comprehensive analysis of independent living, assisted living, continuing care, and memory care communities across the country. Best Senior Living is intended to be the definitive destination for older consumers and their families to help in finding the right senior living community for their needs. Today, we'll examine the 2023 ratings in depth, from the methodology behind them to the ways that consumers and industry leaders alike can use them for their individual needs. Before we get started, I do want to note that we are capturing video of today's session, and we'll be making that available to registrants after we conclude, along with the slides that you'll see shortly. I also encourage you to visit usnews.com/events to see videos and recap articles of past US News events and to register for some of our upcoming programs. Today, you'll hear from several of my US News colleagues: Ben Harder, Managing Editor and Chief of Health Analysis; Liz Pierce, Product Director for Senior Living; Sumita Singh, Senior Vice President and General Manager for Health, along with two industry guests, Jeff Frum, Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Silverado, and Larry Rovelas, Chief Executive Officer of IntegraCare. Finally, we want to make this session as interactive as possible. Later on, we'll have some time for audience questions and feedback. If you're watching the session live and you have questions, we ask that you please type them into the Q&A feature in Zoom on your screen. We'll monitor those in real time and give voice to as many as we can. If we can't get to your question today, or if it's something very specific to your institution or to your situation, please email seniorliving@usnews.com. Now I'll turn it over to Ben Harder to dive into the Best Senior Living methodology. Ben?
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and share a few slides that my colleague and I have prepared. You should now be seeing them. Please let me know, Michael, if you are having any trouble viewing them.
All good.
All right, wonderful. So I'm going to speak for just about 10 or 15 minutes here about the survey and methodology that we used for the Best Senior Living ratings this year. And then my colleague, Liz Pierce, will go into more of what the consumer experience is on the US News website. So first of all, why we created Best Senior Living. Our goal as an organization at US News and World Report is to educate consumers and help them make decisions that are informed by data. We call this data-driven decision support, and we do this for consumers of nursing home care, hospital care, other forms of healthcare, and other consumer services and products. When it comes to senior living, the premise that we approach this with is that consumer satisfaction matters to prospective consumers or customers of senior living communities. And so therefore, we wanted to make sure that we took an approach that captured and reflected to our users the customer experience with senior living communities across the country. Now, we've had only 2 years into this journey, but we have an exciting future ahead of us, we think. Just to recap where we've come so far, last year was the first year that we published Best Senior Living ratings. To do that, we teamed up with Activated Insights, now part of HCP, and Activated Insights conducted surveys at cost to nearly 3,000 communities that chose to participate in the inaugural edition of Best Senior Living. This past year, we expanded that participation. So about 4,000 communities participated. They performed surveys in collaboration with Activated Insights between April of last year and November of last year. And we also enriched the content and web experience that users of our Best Senior Living product can enjoy. And we began collaborating directly with operators of senior living communities. And my colleague Liz will talk about those in more detail in a few minutes. So I just want to talk briefly about what the survey captures. There are 21 questions on the survey that consumers respond to, and they fall into these 7 domains that you see here. These are aspects that may be more important to some consumers or in certain care levels than others, but they capture different facets. For example, there are multiple questions on different aspects of food and dining, and multiple questions on management and staff. One of the questions also is an overall question around the quality of the consumer experience at their particular community and care level. Now, we also asked consumers of senior living care what matters to them, and specifically focusing on these 7 categories or domains that we have data on. And as you can see from this table, there are some that matter more to consumers than others. And so we took this information into account in our methodology, which I'll come back to in a moment. But for each of these categories, as you can see, a majority of consumers rated them as either important or very important in deciding where they wanted to be living. So these are all, in our view, important to consumers, and we wanted to make sure that they're all represented in the methodology. Now, I want to speak about who is included in the survey. There are 2 separate populations who are surveyed: residents of senior living communities, that is current residents, and also family members of those residents. And depending on care level, we use data from one or both of those constituents to calculate the ratings. So in independent living and evaluating independent living communities, we use resident surveys only. In evaluating memory care, we turn to the data from family member responses. And in evaluating assisted living, we combine data from residents who responded and family members of residents who responded. The communities that were evaluated were those that opted to complete the voluntary survey and provided sufficient data to be evaluated. So in all, there were 3,867 communities that completed the survey process for at least one of the 3 care levels that we evaluated. Some communities provide all 3 services, all 3 care levels, and therefore had data for all 3. Somewhat maybe standalone memory care communities and only provided data for that one care level, or independent living only, depending on what services they offer. Of the nearly 3,900 communities that completed the survey, most of them, over 90%, met the criteria that we established for them to actually be evaluated in that care level. And the primary requirement for being evaluated was a minimum response rate. You can see in the table on the right that there are response criteria for each care level. So for example, 30% of residents had to respond to the survey in order for a community to be evaluated in independent living. And also there had to be at least 5 residents who responded to meet that 30% threshold. For the minority of communities or care levels that did not meet the criteria and therefore didn't get scored this year, that generally was because they just didn't meet the response rate criteria, and or they were so small that that they only had a few responses and really didn't give us enough data to reliably judge the quality of that particular care level at that particular community. Even so, for those communities and the care levels where we didn't have sufficient data, they are still profiled on usnews.com. So you can find information about them on the US News website. There are a couple of other criteria you can see in the footnotes there that I'll just briefly mention. One is that our partner Activated Insights ran an algorithm to evaluate data integrity, and that was applied. So there were some communities for whom not all of their data were used because of that process. And then one response per family was counted. So if a resident had memory care, for example, had many family members who were on record as being associated with them, and many of them responded, we didn't count the responses of that particular family. We made sure that they counted equal with someone who had only 1 or 2 family members respond. Now, I want to give you a recap of the results that we published this year, and then I'll talk about the specifics of how we arrived at these results through our methodology. So there were 1,675 communities that earned a best recognition in at least one care level. You can see the numbers here for the individual care levels. These were not mutually exclusive. So for example, a community could be best in independent living and also best in assisted living if they provided both of those services and met the criteria that I'll speak about in a moment. At each care level, approximately 30% of surveyed communities earned the best rating this year. And I say approximately 30% because there is no constraint on how many communities can be rated best if they meet the criteria established by our methodology. So this is really this is not a zero-sum game. One community or one operator can do extremely well at no penalty to others, and it is theoretically possible for all communities to be rated best in the services that they provide, but they need to make sure that they get the response, the positive reactions from their consumers that they aim for. Now, a detailed methodology description is available on our website. It's a multi-page PDF, and it goes into a great deal of detail about what I'll share in about 3 very brief slides here. So if you want more detail, please do seek that out. We're also going to save some time for question and answer today. To find this methodology report, you can search online for something like US News Senior Living Methodology, and it should be one of the first results that comes up. Be aware that our methodology from our ratings last year is also still publicly available, so just make sure that you're referring to the most recent one, which is dated 2023-24. So again, briefly, I want to talk about how we calculated each community's score at each care level. We used an approach that's similar to Net Promoter Score, which some of you may be familiar with. We categorized each response that we got from a resident or a family member of a resident into either positive, neutral, or negative. And then we calculated a net positive score for that response by subtracting the negative responses we gotten from the positive responses. So percent positive responses minus percent negative responses generates a net positive percentage. And that percentage was then scaled to a score from 0 to 1. So that's a 0 to 1 score for each question for each care level. And you remember we have 3 different care levels, 21 different questions. So there's a lot of data at that point. We then calculated an overall score level for each care level, for each community at each care level that it provided by creating a weighted average of the scores for the individual 21 questions. So each question was worth a certain percentage of that overall score. They were not equal weighted, and I want to emphasize that the approach that we used was based both on our statisticians' assessment of the variability of the data. Some responses were very clustered. There was really very little difference, and others were really helpful in helping us identify which communities did very well on a question and which didn't do as well. So we took data variability into account, and we also took consumer priorities into account. You can see on the right here a portion of a table that appears in full in our methodology report. So if you can't read it here, don't worry, just Google, as I suggested a moment ago, and you will be able to track that down and study it at your leisure. But the numbers that you see there, the weights that we assigned, were informed by, as I said earlier, the responses that we got from consumers who helped us identify what which of the domains we're measuring are most important to them. And so that was factored in to the overall weighting and scheme and methodology. And then lastly, communities were rated best in a particular care level if their overall score, that weighted average score for that care level, reached a set threshold. So the set threshold that we used this year for that best recognition was 0.85, and you remember that's on a 0 to 1 scale, and that was applied across all care levels. That is a modification from the methodology we used last year, where there were slightly different threshold scores, and so that is one change that we implemented this year to be aware of. But again, keep in mind that there's no maximum number of communities that can achieve that 0.85 score. And so there was really no limit to the number of communities that can earn the recognition, provided that their consumers have a strong net positive impression of them across the 21 survey items. We also, another change we made this year was revising the weights, as I mentioned a moment ago, to better align with consumers' expressed priorities to us. And so since we are aiming to serve consumers and meet them where their objectives are, we wanted to take their voice and relative importance of different elements into account. And then one other change that we made this year that I'll mention is The criteria for best CCRC were revised, and among the changes that we made there, we now factor in the performance of the health center using data from our separate best nursing homes ratings. So that is now part of the methodology for best CCRC. I know I went through that quite quickly, but I do want to turn it over to my colleague Liz Pierce now, and we will certainly have time for questions about the methodology later. Liz?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. While Ben spends his time with his team, really diving into this data and figuring out the best way for us to evaluate these ratings, I spend a lot of my time on the product side, figuring out the best way to make them as useful and as clear and as easy to understand as possible for our consumers. So there are a couple of key highlights and changes to our community profile pages that are new for 2023 that I wanted to share on today's call. Ben, if you could go to the next slide, please. The first of those is about highlighting some of the information that we have found to be most important to consumers. Up near the top of the page, you can see that in the screenshot on the left, the comments, the count of responses, the overall score, an enumeration of the badges that were awarded. All of those are clickable elements this year that drive users further down into the page where they can find more details about what drove those ratings, which leads me to the second point. In the screenshot on the right there, you see some trophy icons that call out areas of the survey where a particular community has performed well. Those icons are again informed by the results of our user survey and what users said were important to us. And for those of you who might remember last year, in the inaugural year, we really leaned into providing a great deal of detail on these pages down to the question level by care type. We heard from our users that amount of information was fairly overwhelming. And so we have streamlined that and made it a little bit easier for users to scan and parse and really see what makes each community stand out for 2023. On the next slide, the other big change and improvement for 2023 is that we have developed a process whereby senior living companies can claim their community profiles and provide photos, a narrative description, and even more detail about specific features and amenities and services that the communities offer. We are very, very happy to be able to provide this information to our consumers. We know that the combination of that contextual information alongside the ratings is extremely important in supporting them as they navigate this decision. And we are thrilled to have that data from so many of the participating communities this year. Anybody who hasn't yet provided that data but is interested can email us at the email address that you see on the screen, and we can give you some more information about how to get that process started. We can go ahead. And we can do one more, I think. We spend a lot of time at this time of the year thinking and talking about the methodology, how we display the awards, how we explain the awards to users on our profile pages. But we thought it was important also to step back and recognize that users are coming to US News throughout the year for help at every stage of the senior living journey, from early in the process when they're trying to understand changing needs, how to manage them, through the selection process and even afterwards. Folks are coming to US News at every stage of that journey. And so we thought it might be helpful today to share some of the insights that we're gaining from users as they interact with US News throughout that process. So you can go ahead, Ben. We'll have a few more highlights from the user survey that Ben mentioned earlier in this section. And one of the first questions we asked was we wanted to find out what families are looking for and why they're coming to US News and searching for senior living. And what we found is that for those visitors who were searching for senior living for themselves and or their spouse, the key drivers of that search were that they were looking to downsize from their current home, looking for more socialization or activity options, and just needed help with assistance with basic household chores and things such as meal preparation. For those who are searching on behalf of a parent or a loved one, help with the activities of daily living was a key motivator for that search, as well as issues surrounding memory care, memory loss causing concerns, and again, that need for assistance with chores and meal preparation. If you go to the next slide. What we're seeing early in the process in this type of search is that users are engaging primarily with our editorial content, our advice, our guides and articles. And earlier in their journey, they are really looking for information that will help them understand the different types of senior living that is available, and which one might be the best fit for themselves or their family. And a lot of interest as well in our editorial content that helps users understand the landscape of how much different types of senior livings cost and what their options for payment are. As we continue to expand our editorial footprint this year, these are areas where we'll be expanding our coverage as well to provide as much detail and context for seniors and their families as possible in this earlier stage of the journey. The next slide. As folks start to narrow down their search and figure out what type of senior living might be appropriate for them, what we're finding is that U.S. News is a key source of information for people who are wanting to make sure that they're looking at the right communities. In this survey question, we asked folks why they were visiting the U.S. News website, and we found that 46% were really focused on making sure that they knew what options existed in their area that they should be considering. And a secondary consideration, as you can see, is that people are turning to U.S. News to get more information, validation, confirmation, or not, about recommendations that they're hearing from other sources, whether that's their friends and family or other sources online. In that other category that you see in the slide here, a common refrain is that our users are looking for reviews and ratings to help them make their decision. So we're pleased to be able to support them on that as well. On the next slide. And again, as users are generating that list, are validating recommendations, trying to understand what's going to be the best fit. Ben mentioned this earlier. I touched on it as well when we were looking at the profiles. But we found that safety, management and staff, and the cost and value received for that cost across care types that people are looking at are some of the most important factors that seniors and their families are considering. For families that are looking into assisted living, the quality of the caregiving is critically important as well. On the next slide. And finally, just to wrap it up, I think it's important to highlight that consumers' engagement with U.S. News doesn't stop when they've made a decision. They're continuing to come to us for advice and support as they navigate the move itself and try to coordinate that process. And even further down the line, maybe months or years after that initial move, seniors and their families are still looking to U.S. News for information about when it might be time to transition care levels and other topics of that nature. And so as we look ahead to our product roadmap and our content roadmap here at U.S. News, we're really looking forward to continuing to learn from our consumers, to help them solve their problems, and to provide the best possible support as they navigate this really critical life decision. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Ben. I want to now welcome Sumita Singh, Senior Vice President and General Manager for Health at U.S. News, along with Jeff Frum, Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Silverado, and Larry Ravelis, CEO of IntegraCare. Sumita, Larry, and Jeff, over to you all to talk a little bit further about some of the things that Ben and Liz have teed up.
Thanks so much, Michael. And thank you, Ben and Liz, for taking us through where we are today, the journey that we've been on, short 2-year journey, and lots of excitement there, and the roadmap. There's tremendous insight that Liz is gathering that is informing our roadmap, and that goes to the essence of U.S. News. We're customer-led, we're research-led, and a lot of the innovations we're doing on product is entirely driven by both usage data and survey data. Let me welcome Jeff and Larry. Thank you both. I know, Jeff, you possibly are on vacation, so thank you for taking the time of being part of this despite being on vacation. And Larry, of course, thank you for taking the time. I know the industry is, time is of value to you. There's a lot of movement in the industry right now, and we appreciate you being here. I will ask a few questions about how your experience has been with our metrics and our evaluation over the last 12 months. But I'm going to step back for a minute and lean into where Liz left off. So perhaps I'll start with you, Larry. Take us through, you've heard from Liz what consumers are looking for when they come to US News. From your experience, what are consumers looking for when they search for best senior living? And typically, what is that life cycle like? What's the period of research before they, in fact, make the decision to go to IntegraCare or to Silverado or whomever else they choose in their neighborhood?
Yeah, I think Liz in the survey there captured pretty well sort of the priorities of what people are looking for. I think what's changed is how they find the information. When I got in this industry 20 years ago, people were looking for safety. They were looking for caregiving. They were looking for, food and activities. It's all the same stuff, right? And I think most of the people probably who are on the webinar here, they know enough about senior housing to know that this is the stuff that people care about. But when I started 20 years ago, the way that you got that information was basically you toured the community, right? And I remember when I went through my my initial sales training, the goal was, when somebody called up, because this was early in the internet, when somebody called up, the goal was basically to get them into the community as quickly as possible so that they could gather all that information sort of in person, right? And so you tended not to give out pricing over the phone because you wanted them to come across the transom in order to get the pricing, right? You tended not to try to oversell over the phone because, again, you wanted them across. So I think what's changed is where people get information now. I think certainly the websites have gotten better. I think social media is much more important than it ever was. I think most of us during the pandemic put virtual tours on the website, and I think groups like the professional referral sources, the paid referral sources, have essentially stepped in and tried to guide the consumer in their journey. And so I think as the needs are evergreen, but the channels of communication I think are evolving, and sort of that's why I'm kind of interested in what US News is doing here and kind of where it's going to go.
Thanks, Larry. Jeff, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, in Silverado being 100% memory care, and in that sphere, the decision from our consumers is largely becoming a healthcare decision. And I think that's interesting that typically a crisis precipitates an urgent need to find memory care near me on the internet. We get a lot of hits to our website between 6 and 11 p.m. at nighttime after son or daughter, come home from work and hear about what happened to mom or dad. So it's really, as Larry said, it's really important for us to make sure that we are strategic and dialed in with the digital presence and our partners. And I know from the healthcare, we were excited to partner up with US News just because you've been in healthcare for a long time. And they may be sitting in a hospital that's a best hospital rated for US News. And we see the billboards all over the airports and whatnot. And so our consumers are in the healthcare side are certainly familiar with the brand. So it's important for us to have that digital presence and the validators, the people that are telling the story about us to other people, and getting that third party, that validation from the US News of the world. I think it's very important for our consumers.
Yeah, that's a nice segue to my next question, Jeff. I didn't feed you the question, so one of the things we've learned, and Ben runs health analysis for the healthcare vertical, so he looks at hospitals, he's looking at all the domains we touch, care sites we evaluate. We know that brand, particularly for some of the other healthcare segments, is important. So my question is, in senior living, what does brand mean for IntegraCare or for Silverado? Is that important to the market? And if so, how do you imagine building brand differentiators in the market? And maybe I'll start with you, Jeff, and then we'll flip over to Larry.
Yeah, it is really important for us. Our brand, our culture is everything to us. It's a pride for our staff to come work for the #1 memory care provider in the country. We're the first to get the recognition from the International Alzheimer's Disease Institute in America. So that's really important for us to get that recognition. Last year when we had our first experience with US News, you know, we're very competitive, and your choice to partner with Activated Insights was great because we're familiar with the platform on the great places to work. And we've used that, you know, process to become, you know, one of the top employers in the country, ranked top 5, you know, 3 years in a row on that, you know, best places to work. So for us, partnering up here was fun for us internally. You know, just the competition and you know, with our staff, and it helps us in our messaging to attract talent. You know, that if we're U.S. News Best Memory Care, helps us to attract the top talent, but it also, you know, we use it in a lot of our communications, our letters to families, our letters to professionals. And it builds confidence in our brand when we can tout the recognition of best memory care, you know, by U.S. News. So for us, it's everything.
Larry, how about you?
Yeah, the question of brand in our industry is a fascinating one. I think I would first of all say Silverado has probably done the best job of any company in the industry on building a brand, building a strong brand. And I say that being an alumnus of Sunrise. I love Sunrise Senior Living. They have, their name is everywhere. I think that but I think Silverado's clarity in the market for what they stand for is probably clearer than anyone. You know, a brand is ultimately sort of a shorthand for, you know, a set of promises about what the consumer expectation is going to be, right? Whether it's a brand of soft drink or whether it's a brand of sneakers, you know, it essentially there's a whole sort of value package that goes along with what that is. And you know, I think for senior housing, brand can be an important thing because essentially, you know, essentially a senior or their family is moving into a community with the hope and expectation that you know, that person will be safe and well cared for and have a good quality of life and not be ignored and all the rest of that, right? And it's hard to communicate that in a single sentence or a single phrase. As I said, Silverado's done about as good as anyone has. I think the industry has stumbled a little bit in creating brands. I remember a decade and a half ago, part of the thesis of Brookdale, which is a terrific company on a lot of levels. It invested pretty significantly in trying to create a nationwide brand. And I don't think it worked very well. I don't think the consumer really understood what it meant to move into a Brookdale community. And I think similarly with Sunrise, again, which I have the highest regard for, you know, that it's not clear what the brand value of a Sunrise is. And then there are some people in the industry who believe, in fact, brands are negative because they just attract liability lawyers. And so there's certain operators in, you know, in this kind of Southeast who have explicitly, you know, debranded their communities because if they're seen as a big guy, then the plaintiffs' lawyers are going to go after them. So the question is, how do you create that shorthand for quality, consistency, reliability, all the things that people want, value, you know, in a phrase? And I think it's challenging from an operator standpoint to do it. And that's sort of where the proxies for a brand come in. I think that historically the biggest proxy has been the quality of the building, right? You've got a beautiful building, you must have beautiful care. Well, we all know that that's not true, right? And so in the search for other proxies, you know, for how to shorthand what it is that people are looking for, I think that's kind of what's interesting about, you know, the U.S. News and, you know, the Activated Insights survey is because they actually do reach down into what it is that people want, you know, which is, you know, with the experience, and then try to come back up and build a brand around that.
Yeah, that's really insightful, Larry. And we see that, and we've heard that in the last year and a half from the industry. You've segued me into my next question. So in the last year, we've been in the market. We have a CEO council. You're on it. We get advice from senior executives. What has your experience been in the 1 year that you've worked with U.S. News? I believe your organization has licensed the badge. How has that, two dimensions to the question. One is how has that helped, in your view, or not, consumer decision support? And number two, how have you used it internally and the partnership, and if you like, with U.S. News to improve your goals and business objectives? And, you know, I think the audience would be interested in learning those elements from you, and of course from you, Jeff, momentarily.
I think I'm better equipped to answer the second of those than the first, which is how we used them. And let me come back to the first part of your question, which is how it's guided the consumer journey. In terms of the first year with it, a bunch of our communities, most of our communities won the awards, and we took that as an opportunity basically to kind of celebrate it, both with the, to the external market, to new customers, to the, to the families and residents, and also to the team members. So, when we won the award, we sent out a letter to all of our families letting them know. We certainly bragged about it on social media, put it on our website, press releases. We put in our signature block. In my signature block, it says Larry Revelis and my phone number and my email, and then it has the 2 little badges for what we're doing there. I think as importantly to me, I think it's fair to say. We took it as an opportunity to celebrate the teams who really made it possible. So we organized, for the communities that won it, we organized a party where sometimes we had food trucks and sometimes we had barbecue and just celebrated. We certainly put posters up in the building recognizing it. I think a few communities did T-shirts. So again, doing something to go recognize the teams for what they did. So we took it as an opportunity both to celebrate, and that's all in the external stuff. That doesn't even count kind of what we did to go dig into where we fell short. And excuse me, and then we dug into that and said, okay, we need to improve in these 3 areas. We communicated with the families and said, thank you for filling out the survey. The survey helped us identify both what we're doing well and what we're not doing well. This is what we're going to work on in the coming year, and I hope to see improvement. This is where we fell short. This is, we hear you loud and clear, and these are the this is where we are going to work on to improve. So it allowed kind of a feedback mechanism with the families to that I thought again was productive. So so that's how kind of how we used it. Your question about how it's guided the consumer journey, I can give some thoughts on in a minute, but I don't want to monologue too long, and I want to give Jeff his opportunity.
Yeah, I think how we used it, we did a lot of the same celebrations that Larry did, and it was, in memory care coming out of COVID, we got hit pretty hard. They were heroes on the front line, and we lose track of what we do every day, and it was great for us to pause and hear from our customers in this format, and then be able to share that with our teams, and even the feedback down to the department level, and what we're doing right, and what we still need to work on, which is important. But it was a really encouraging time for us. We had 100% of our communities rate best memory care in that first year, and so it was a cool celebration for us. But there was a lot of work to do coming out of COVID, and it gave us an insight from our families on a roadmap of things that we still needed to improve on. And I'd say we were still, we probably didn't do as good of a job as we could have communicating with our families the feedback that varied from community to community. And so that's an area that we are really taking to heart this year, is making sure that our customers know, which is the families for us in memory care. It's not our residents. So it's important for them to know exactly what we're working on. And so it's given us a good roadmap to do that. So that's been important.
That's great. So Larry, back to you. You have to finish the full circle on my question earlier. You're on mute.
So your question, if I understood it correctly, and if not, interrupt me, is basically, what have you seen in the first year about how consumers have interacted with the information? And I will say, I don't know. I am very eager to see the work that Liz and the others are doing to sort of build out the website and to create the experience, because I will say, if this is just about the recognition, like, that's fine, but and I'm proud to get it. But ultimately, there's 100 different ways we go show our our potential customers that we're good places to be, right? It has to do with our call bell response times. It has to do with the quality of the training that we give our salespeople. It has to do with the first impression when you walk in, right? So if it's just about the badge, it's worth this much time. But if US News is really aiming to help transform the journey that families and seniors go on when they make this decision, that to me is interesting, and that to me is important, because I think it's a subpar journey right now. How you gather information, how you get feedback, how you get your questions answered. I think that there's a lot of ways that needs to get better. I think, we all have played around with ChatGPT, I assume, and the interactiveness of that. It certainly got me thinking. I'm sure it's got a lot of other people thinking, gee, I wonder how many people are going to type in, how should I choose, a senior living community? And that interactive dialogue that they're going to have with a bot is certainly something that I want to be shaping, right? I want to make sure that IntegraCare is at the forefront of that dialogue. And so how do I do that? I don't know, but we're certainly going to be working on it. And my guess is that what US News is trying to do here is to go help change the dialogue, whom families talk to, and how. So that's a little windy. All that's to say is whatever you've done in the past year, it doesn't come close to accomplishing what I hope you're going to accomplish, in the future.
Give us time, Larry. It's only been 12 months. We're working on it.
I agree with.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, let me add that. I agree with Larry. It was, first off, we're picky about what we put on our websites. So the badge was, a recognizable brand, and we were proud to put it on. Did it make a difference? We don't know. And I think that's, the big, we make data-driven decisions, and it was really hard for us to gauge from our consumers if that made a difference. So I think, these refreshed websites, that have more detail, our ability to personalize those, and if we can get more impressions from that or links to our website from that, it'll be interesting to see the data, this year, to see if our web leads increased, if our conversion rates increased. So that I'm anticipating looking at, and I'm very excited to see if it makes a difference, because certainly, another avenue to get more consumers to our front door, then the better. Then we get a chance to change more lives.
Yeah, I agree. And we did not talk about senior living premium proposition that Liz is working on. I know Silverado will be a pilot account, and we will learn together on that journey and how we educate. And I take your points, both of your points, really well. I agree with you, Larry, that the user journey is fragmented, and using technology to make that decision support interactive, but not lose sight of the content and what we write, what information we provide. The trustworthiness of that becomes so much more profound in a world of ChatGPT. Trusted, these are life decisions, much like choosing a hospital or choosing a doctor. So we're looking at technology thoughtfully, is as I'm sure you are too. So I've been on 2 calls this morning about interactivity and providing answers to users in a way, but I know Liz and our chief content officer is also thinking about content needs that consumers want, and they tell us. They come to our site, they take surveys, and they tell us. I'm mindful of questions coming in from the public, and I want to open that up. So I have a last question to wrap it up, Michael, if you'll allow me one last question. Let me go to you, Jeff. So what does a future partnership look like? You kind of answered that a bit for US News. What and let's say Silverado, what does good look like? What does success look like for your consumers, and how could we help you in that journey?
Yes, we have a lot of different opinions on the aggregators that are these digital referral agencies in our industry. And we're looking for trust and transparency in how these third parties are advertising, to get people to their sites. And so we're hoping to have a very transparent relationship with you guys to grow our web leads, to attract more consumers to our website, to our sales team, so that we can engage them and care for their loved ones. So it'll be interesting to hopefully we can have regular business reviews looking at data and how many hits that we have to the sites, the US News sites, and the transitions and the conversion rates, and did we increase tours and move-ins because of it. So we hope to share data back and forth and to really fine tune this process. Because it's important for us to attract those that are in a crisis. And when we're in memory care, it's a crisis, typically, that has precipitated a move to memory care. And these are big decisions. I mean, our families are spending up to $100,000 a year or more for their loved one to live long-term care and memory care. And
Yeah.
oftentimes it's the last place that their loved one will live, for the course of their life. So it's a big decision, important decision, and we need to make sure that the real data is out there, the real, facts, so they can make data-driven decisions from the consumer perspective, because we know they're doing a whole lot of Googling about best memory care near me to try and filter through it all, so they can go to their doctor, go to their advisors, for their opinion. So so hopefully the transparency and sharing of data between us will help inform a better customer experience.
Thank you, Jeff. Larry?
Can I add on to what Jeff had said? So I think part of what I hope to see happen is not just that, our communities get, put in front of people, but in fact that the consumer is guided more quickly and more efficiently to the best community for them, even before they make the phone call to us. And what I mean by that is, there are certain paid referral sources that will, gather some information and then spam out to, a dozen or more communities, okay, time for you to contact this person. Well, if you look at the amount of time and effort that goes into responding to each of those leads, and then this batting average, so to speak, of how many times you actually kind of connect with that person and, tour them, and then they come, it's a relatively inefficient process. And it wastes the time of the consumer, because they're talking to a lot of salespeople at communities that they ultimately won't be going to. It wastes our time, because these people, aren't going to be, moving into our community. I would rather have, I think about kind of the number of touches that are necessary through certain channels relative to the yield, and that's wasted effort, and it's wasted time on my part and my salespeople's time and the consumer's time. So to the extent that there is a smarter engine that can guide people who are not likely to move into my community anyway, guide them away from me and to the Silverados who are much better suited to their needs, right? There's still plenty of market for me to do what I do best. And it gives more time for my salespeople to spend time with the prospective residents and families who would most benefit from what we have to offer.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Jeff, so much for being here and answering questions, and certainly being so candid. And we appreciate that at US News. As I wrap up, there are two dimensions of work that we are focused on at US News, and we'll share that as we provide more data to the industry. Transparency, Jeff, you mentioned that, very important to us, which is why we put the methodology out there. We put how we're evaluating companies out there, and of course working with you and Larry and other partners in the data exchange and learning as we go. I'll say there are two elements. One is on the work that Ben does. We want to provide a thoughtful, data-driven, analytically sound guidance on what is best. And the more communities participate, the more coverage we have, the more value we provide to the consumer. So that's a mission for us. And on the second side, the work that Liz is doing, we've only just begun. It's been, frankly, to be fair to Liz, 6 months of engineering of the data. And I'm very optimistic that we build something that is meaningful and transparent. And we look for partners in that journey. So I know, Jeff, you're a partner, Larry, you're a partner in how we learn mutually. And it's singularly important for US News that we're not wasting their time, we're getting them to the right place, and we're doing that in the most trustworthy and high value way. That's what we do in other segments in healthcare, and that's our mission in senior living. So thank you both, and I'll hand it over to you, Michael. I might have taken—
Actually, Sumita, can I ask one question?
Of course.
Okay, so this is a question for Ben. So Sumita just articulated a couple of things that will get this, the results better and better, the participation of the communities, Liz doing her thing. But I think part of it depends on Ben as well, okay? And what I mean by that is the questions that are asked and the responses that are given are important, and how you weight them is important. My son has just gone through the college application process, right? And I have seen the pathologies of certain aspects of the US News process in that affect the behavior of colleges and whom they accept and whom they don't. And I won't go into a lot of detail, on that, but I think it's fair to say that the asking of certain questions and the responses end up warping behavior of certain colleges in ways that sub-optimize the search process for both the colleges and for the team members. Okay, I'm speaking a little hypothetically, but my question to you, Ben, and maybe to everyone here, is how will U.S. News as an organization work with the industry to make sure that the questions that are being asked, the things that are being surveyed, the things that are being weighted, don't end up creating pathological problems, like I think it has in at least with one particular question that I know of, that it has in other areas of surveying.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Larry. It's a really important one. I think you're speaking to the danger of unintended consequences, that by measuring something, even if it provides important signal to consumers, there is always the potential that operators then sort of overly focus on what's being measured, and fail to manage other aspects of their service delivery that are very important to their consumers and ultimately important to meeting their organization's objectives. The way that we have approached that in our healthcare vertical, which, as Sumita mentioned, my team works on the hospital rankings that we publish, on our nursing home ratings and other healthcare evaluations. We have approached that by very much being engaged with operators or providers to understand what the incentives are for them, and how we can make sure that what we're measuring aligns with their organizations and their professions goals in terms of providing the best care possible. So you saw both me and Liz talk about the voice of the consumer and how we're reflecting that in the measure weights that we use. We have also, our practice across all of our healthcare rankings and ratings has been to take feedback on board from professional organizations and individual operators, so that we can make sure that we are continually calibrating our methodology so that it creates positive incentives for everyone in the industry. And so you saw, the email address that Liz showed. We are eager to get feedback on the methodology as well as on the product from operators and individual communities across the country. And, I spoke about the methodology changes that we made this year. You can expect that our methodology will continue to evolve. Our best hospitals methodology, we've been publishing rankings of best hospitals since 1990, continues to evolve every single year because we're taking on board that feedback from healthcare professionals and from consumers.
Good, that's helpful, thank you. I will make a strong urge and a pitch to keep, as it evolves, to keep talking with the industry, because I think, well, for all the obvious reasons, we're dealing with people's lives, and you do not want operators, running their businesses for running their communities for the benefit of the U.S. News ranking rather than for the benefit of the residents. So please keep those unintended consequences in mind, and I'm confident with what you just articulated that you can stay within those stay outside of those problems.
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate that question. Thanks, Ben. Over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you all. I think we do have a lot of questions from those who are with us watching the webinar live today. As Ben just alluded to, if you have a question we can't get to, if you have a specific question, just something else or question or feedback you want to share with us, please do email seniorlivinginfo@usnews.com. That's seniorlivinginfo@usnews.com. I also want to remind everyone that we are recording video of this session. It'll be available to share with colleagues who may have missed it. You can see the slides that were presented and so forth. So look for a follow-up email from our team, but let's get into some of these audience questions. Ben, I think this maybe I'll start with you on this one. Has safety always ranked the highest in terms of consumer priorities? Is this a result of recent challenges with the pandemic? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, Michael. So one thing I wanted to clarify here is that actually safety, the question on safety, does not have the highest weight in the methodology. You did see that was something that consumers expressed was a high priority for them, and we took that into account. But as I also said, we looked at data variability and other aspects of the data that we had in designing the final weighting. So just to correct the questioner on that and clarify what I said before, and you can find all of this in the methodology report, so you don't need to even be writing this down. But the highest weight both years was assigned to the overall question. That was 20%, and that's the core Q question regarding how satisfied consumers are with their community. So that is the most heavily weighted question across all three care types. In assisted living and memory care, we also assigned a 20% weight to consumers' assessment of the care that they received. And I think that speaks to Jeff's point of how important healthcare is, to particularly at those care levels, that's a really critical component of whether a community is the right match for the resident and their family. So those are actually the most heavily weighted questions. But to come back to safety, based on that feedback that we did get from our consumers, we increased the weight assigned to the safety question in all three care levels. Last year, it was between 2 and 5% weight in each of the three care levels, and this year it was between 8 and 10% weight. So really, at least doubled the weight of that in our methodology in each of the three care levels.
Thank you, Ben, for that answer and that important clarification. Another question that I think stick with you, Ben, but anyone feel free to weigh in. If a community has multiple care levels, but they only want to submit survey information for one of them, for instance, is that acceptable? Could you talk a little bit about that as you manage these kind of multifaceted entities?
Sure. So, as I said, it is entirely voluntary whether communities elect to participate in our survey. We are seeing, even in the first 12 months, considerable growth in participation. We do expect that communities that choose to participate will participate at all care levels that they offer. So if they offer independent living and assisted living, both of those populations should be surveyed. If they offer assisted living and memory care, both of those should be surveyed. If they offer all three, we expect them to participate in the survey across all three of those care levels.
We have, Liz, I think this may be a question for you on the kind of product and technology front. If a community is not on the US News site or wants to add photos to its profile page, what's the process to do that? Could you share a little bit?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. To kick off the process, I'll say it again. You can email us at seniorlivinginfo@usnews.com. Our team monitors that inbox closely. We have a pretty straightforward set of steps whereby you can fill out an Excel template with the information that is text-based that can show up on the community webpage, and a process for uploading photos as well. We've heard from folks that that's pretty straightforward, and definitely let us know if you have any questions or feedback about that process. We're always looking to improve.
Great, thank you. Another, I think, methodology related question. Are you able to provide specific mapping of methodology categories to specific activated insights survey questions? While some are obvious, there may be others that are a little vaguer, or the mapping isn't as clear. Ben, is that something you could talk a little bit more about, or again, maybe refer to the methodology report?
Sure. So in the methodology report, we do have a table identifying the 21 survey items that were used. But I think based on the full text of the question you're referring to, Michael, there was at least one that was unclear to the questioner regarding location. So that's feedback that's very helpful to us. We can look at perhaps more explicitly documenting that in future methodology reports. But with respect to their question about which survey question maps to what we describe as location in the methodology report, I think they're right. That is the question that asks, this community made my surroundings home-like, and that is the one that is reflected in that on that line in the table. And if that individual who asked that question or other members, other folks participating today have further needs to clarify, please do email that inbox that we have. We can clarify to the extent you need it.
Another questioner asks, what aspect of quote management and staff are they looking for? This person just would love a little more clarity on that. Ben, Liz, I don't know if you all speak to that.
Sure, I'm happy to start, and Liz, feel free to jump in. So again, these are survey questions that we're referring to here, and I'll just read. They're very simple questions, but really the respondent can choose how they want to answer, or what they may be thinking of when they respond will be specific to the experience of that particular consumer. One of the questions on staff is overall, how would you rate the staff? And that is one of the core Q questions. And there's an additional question on the survey that says, I am satisfied with management at my community. And again, consumers can rate that on a 5-point scale from most satisfied to most unsatisfied. So those two questions are the ones that we use to assess staff and management. And as you can imagine, the particular salience of different encounters that the resident may have had with the management or staff may factor into how they decide to respond to that.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit to that, Ben, just anecdotally, as I think some of you know, a number of companies and communities have provided the verbatim comments from the survey to US News. And so I've spent some time looking at those, and I can add that for communities that scored highly and for survey respondents who gave high scores on those aspects, a lot of what we saw on the staff front was people who were really pleased to have had a close personal connection, to feel like the staff members were someone who they knew and they cared about, who said hi to them with a big smile, who knew their family and really developed a personal relationship. And on the management front, we heard the same thing. We saw lots of positive comments where people felt like they could really approach the executive director. They had a personal relationship again, that folks were responsive to their problems and made them feel welcome and like they were at home.
Another question, if more than one family member responded to a survey, how did US News determine which family member survey to use, or what went into that decision making? Ben, maybe again to start with you.
Sure. So we had Activated Insights provide a representative response for that family, and that used several filtering criteria. So, for example, we favored a response from the primary contact for that resident over any responses received from secondary family members. So if the primary family member responded, that was the survey response that was used, and so on and so forth. And so that algorithm was something that we worked out with Activated Insights and then applied uniformly to make sure that there was no advantage, unfair advantage or disadvantage to any particular community.
Liz, I think this is a question for you, or at least to start with you. Would US News consider covering whether Medicaid pays for assisted living and memory care in addition to Medicare?
Yes, absolutely. We do have some articles on that now that touch on that subject. And as I mentioned earlier, we know that understanding how to pay is critically important to users on our site. And that's an area where we are planning to expand our coverage.
I want to turn to a question. This was actually a pre-submitted question from someone registering for the webinar. How can senior living facilities and other organizations who want to be included in the survey ensure that they are doing so? Or that, again, is that the best way to contact that senior living info email address? Great, I see some nods. So yeah, Liz, go. Let's see. We've got a few more minutes left. Let me turn to this question. And again, I think, Ben, this may start with you. For residents in memory care, if a resident completes the survey with assistance from a staff member, is that response counted, or do you only count family member responses for memory care residents?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we only looked at family member responses for residents of memory care. Family member responses were used in combination with other responses in assisted living. So that response will not be used for calculating the memory care services score.
I believe Activated Insights was allowing us to use the survey responses from like public guardians or private guardians or the legal representatives that were beyond family members. Is that Not sure if that was the case or not.
Thank you for asking that. Yes, I'm speaking loosely in using the term family members, but other guardians are included in that number. So if someone is is registered as a representative of the resident with Activated Insights, then they would be treated within that family member umbrella. Thanks for helping clarify that.
Another question, Liz, I think this one's for you. Where is my phone number and website if I'm a community on Best Senior Living? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. And I think folks who were on this call last year might remember that at that time we had a partnership with one of the aggregators and referral sites that Larry and Jeff spoke about, caring.com. And we heard during this call and around that time that that model is not what is preferred by the industry. And so with our senior living premium product that Sumita mentioned earlier, we're testing out another approach. It will include some elements of branding and consumer engagement, as well as the opportunity to direct interested consumers from the U.S. News profile directly to the senior living community or company. That's something that we're going to be starting to test out next month. And we're really excited to learn how that will work and share more in the future.
This is another audience question that may be for the broader group. I'll leave it open. Audience member asks, future of continuing care retirement communities. Bankruptcy has happened recently to 4 in Texas. 1 is changing to a strictly rental community. There's some concern, is this model going to survive? Could any of you comment on the CCRCs?
Perhaps a Jeff and Larry question.
Probably more appropriate for Larry if us
Okay.
being 100%
Go for
memory
it,
care.
Larry.
Yeah, so we're headquartered in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is sort of ground zero for the CCRC field. And by the way, I didn't give background on IntegraCare, and I think most people have heard of Silverado. Most people have not heard of IntegraCare. We've got 18 communities in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia. Been around for 20 years, so we're kind of a good, solid, regional operator, and we're growing, moderately in that time. We compete with many CCRCs. I think they provide for the right. They provide a very compelling product for a particular market segment, and I don't see that changing. I think that for those that plan ahead, for those that are thinking about, basically, I need to leave my house. I want to move into someplace for the next 10, 12 years of my life. CCRCs provide a terrific value proposition for it. I think for one thing, their capital structure, which is largely financed through low-cost municipal bonds and entrance fees that don't have any capital cost to them. I think that's hard for market rate. That's hard for senior housing communities that are financed with market rate capital to compete with. So I think the value proposition for CCRCs is very much has an advantage over other segments of senior housing due to its capital structure and compelling value that way. So I don't see that going away. I think that the entrance fee model as well, which is basically laying out money with the expectation you'll get most of it back and then have a low monthly fee. Again, I think for a particular segment, that's very compelling. That hasn't changed. I think what's changed in the industry is there is probably less home equity value than that. Well, no, I mean, I think over time we're going to see as the baby boomers have drawn down equity out of their homes, there will be fewer people that can go draw deeply down the well of their home values to go pay for a big entrance fee. But I see that affecting demand at the margins. I don't see that affecting demand at the at the core of the product.
Thank you, Larry. We probably have time for one more question, but again, if we didn't get to your question today, if you have additional questions, please do contact us at seniorlivinginfo@usnews.com. I'll turn this final question over to you, Ben. Audience member asks, how can 5 responses out of a community of potentially as many as 100 or more residents be statistically significant?
Okay, let me clarify that as well, because the criteria for being evaluated were to have at least 5 responses and at least 30% of surveyed individuals or of the people who reside in the in that care level. So if you had 100 people living in an independent living community, you would need at least 30 of them to respond to the survey for us to have that's significant sample. 5 responses would not cut it. And that is something that we continue to evaluate from an analytical perspective. We did streamline our criteria a little bit this year. So those who compare the 2 years methodology reports will see some modest differences, but it is important to us as the questioner, sort of the core of the question there, is to make sure that we have enough of a representative sample of the residents at that care level to be able to reach reliable conclusions.
Thank you, Ben, for that clarification and that answer. And I want to thank everyone for their time, both on our panel here and in our audience. You asked some good questions, and I think we had a really robust discussion. Again, we'll be sharing a video of this webinar soon. Stay tuned for an email from our team. If you have additional questions or feedback, do please email us at seniorlivinginfo@usnews.com. Thanks so much to Jeff and Larry for joining us for some industry perspective, to Sumita, Liz, and Ben, my colleagues, for being on and sharing more about US News Best Senior Living. Until next time, thanks for being with us.